Can you?
Roman and truth.
Yep. You want to turn on the video?
I guess so.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
How many do we have on, Kathy? Can you tell? Or Kim?
It says 27.
Okay.
See that
Hi,
on-
Ann.
Hi,
Hi, Marcia.
Carolina, you explained to me how to get in to put up the PowerPoint. I'm not seeing anything but all you lovely ladies and gentlemen, and no other prompts.
So on the bottom of the screen, there's a share icon, green.
Oh, yes, now I see it. Got it.
And then we can see your screen if you push that. And then if you need to share, and then when you don't need to share, then unshare.
Okay.
That's great. Do you want to try it? Are you sharing a doc?
I am attempting to, yes.
Yeah, if you have it pulled up on
Okay,
your
yeah.
desktop.
That works. So now we can see anything that's on your screen, Marcia.
You can see it.
Right now, there's nothing.
There's nothing
Well,
because
it takes a little bit of time. Just
to
give it a
load.
few seconds.
Sorry to interrupt. I thought I better go through this quick before we
That's
have.
great. No problem.
To see everybody. Hey, Carolina,
Uh-huh.
did you get my emails about the workshops?
Yes.
Do we know which one is which?
I think I can figure it out. I'm not sure if that's going to be the exact time because they're having a lot of scheduling issues. So
Oh, okay.
it might change. But what we've got right now works for us.
Is that did you look at the map of the Salt Palace? Is it a good location? It seems like it's a good location, but I don't know. Marcia, do you have a workshop?
Yes, we have 4 that we're participating in. Well,
What rooms are in?
150B, something like that. Actually, the 2 that we know for sure that we got the notification on time are at exactly the same time.
Oh,
So, not the best thing.
huh.
I don't know why my video is not working. So weird.
And I can't get this PowerPoint to come up. So,
Well,
You can
yeah,
send
if you
it
share
to
on the bottom, and then if you have it pulled up on your desktop already, and then there should be a choice there where it says desktop, and then you click on that.
would it be a new share?
try it.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, no. Kicked it out.
What works for me is that I have it up on my icon. Then when I push that sharing thing,
It should come right up, and that's exactly what I've got on my screen.
I'm like, it says that you're sharing, Marcia.
Does it? But you can't see the PowerPoint, right?
right?
That's where it should show. Is it a PowerPoint or is it a Google slide?
It's a PowerPoint.
Technology.
It says my screen is paused.
Oh,
But when I unpause it, it still doesn't do anything.
okay, so an audio isn't working from Annalee. So Annalee, you might have to log on your phone and on your computer as well, and use your phone for the audio. That's happened before. It's happened. Or you could go into your laptop. Are you on a laptop? And go into settings and choose a different audio input.
Audio output.
I wonder if she can even hear us.
I'm like, that's what I was just about to ask.
Oh, okay. Should I chatter? I'll chatter.
Here we go.
Neil?
Yes.
Will you stand by to make sure this is working, because some of them are on, but they're not working.
Okay.
Well, what if we do this? Marcia, what if we go ahead and just get started? You can
Yeah.
use your PowerPoint as reference.
In the meantime, Marcia, can you send me your PowerPoint?
Could I do that?
Yeah, I will do that right now.
And then when we send out the link for the training, we can also send out a copy of the PowerPoint if you're okay with that. Go back and reference.
The only thing I'm concerned, Ann, is I wonder if this thing will go if it's so big.
You can send it as a. You can send it in my Dropbox.
All right, ladies. I'm old school. I don't know all this stuff, so we're in trouble.
That's okay. We can get started, and if we don't have the the visual capacity, that's all right. We can maybe send it to everyone through different means later.
Yeah, that works.
It looks like it went, Ann.
Okay, awesome.
Can I get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Kathy Ma'ulu'ulu. There'll be a test on my name later. Just kidding. I am cottage leader for Big Ocean Women in the Salt Lake Valley area, and I'm also on the global strategy team for Big Ocean. We'd like to open with an opening prayer. Wendy, do you mind giving that for us?
I would love to.
Thank you. And just as a housekeeping item, if everyone who's not speaking currently, if you'll just mute yourselves for a second, some of the background noise. And then Wendy, go ahead.
Our dear, kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for the opportunity to gather in our homes from where we are and to be able to learn and prepare for this upcoming meeting and how we can best prepare to serve Thee and be instruments in Thy hands. We pray that Thou might bless those who are leading the training, that they are able to speak the words that Thou would have them speak, and that Spirit may touch our hearts in helping us to receive the message and training that we need to hear. And we pray that Thou might consecrate our efforts moving forward. And we are so grateful to Thee and humbly say these things in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 Marcia, I've got you see this? Just so you know that I do have your PowerPoint.
Okay. It looks a little different now. It's showing an actual ID number, which is different than it was a moment ago.
Well, at least we can use it, yeah.
Well, while you're working on that, I will, Carolina, are we ready? I hate to run everyone over time by
Yeah,
technology.
let's go ahead and get started.
Okay. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about this, UN 101. Probably the essence of what I'll talk about deals with the fact that 20 years ago when I got started, there were so many things that I did not know, primarily because the pro-family effort at the time was very, very new, was a handful of people, and so we were all learning together. So the essence of this is what I wish I had known, what someone might have shared with me. So to begin with, let's go back to, we're not going to spend a lot of time on history, but a little bit. The founding of the UN, 1945. And what's interesting is that'll be the 75th anniversary next year, and there are a lot of celebrations being planned in conjunction with that anniversary. 1942, though, is when the term United Nations was actually coined by President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, FDR. And it was part of a letter that was sent rallying the world against the Axis powers. So the Allies got together and coined that term. 1945, the UN Charter was officially created and signed by 50 countries, eventually to be signed by what is now 193 member states. When I say either a member state, a nation, a country, those are all synonymous terms. The next historical event that I want to spotlight is the writing and the signing 3 years later of the UN Declaration on Human Rights, called the UNDHR. UDHR, and those are all really important. I wish the screen were up and I would show you next. It's an actual organization of chart of the UN. And how close are we to having?
Is it right there?
Are you? I can't see anything coming.
You should be able to scroll through that.
Can you see it?
Marsha, you've got to stop sharing your screen.
Okay, stop share.
Stop share and then answer.
Okay, Ann comes up. And then I can see Ann's screen, and that's how we'll do it?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so you want to go to this one? Do you all see it?
No.
Not yet.
I'll keep moving. As you'll see, hopefully on this next chart, the UN is, as we call it, the mother of all acronyms. And you will hear more than your share of confusing acronyms. There is no expectation that you will learn all these acronyms, but I wanted you to see what this chart actually does look like. It says it started screen sharing, and on mine.
Yeah, it should. I don't know why it's not coming up.
I wonder if 43%. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's just going to take a minute to pull up.
Did it come up then?
Mine just popped up.
It's up on mine.
Mine. I have a copy of this that we can
Yeah, because it's really small.
share.
Hold on.
Well, it's really, whatever you're seeing will be really small. So don't get too distressed about that, because you're not going to read all that anyway.
Okay.
Okay. How's that?
There we go. That's better.
All right. So on the left, you'll see General Assembly and that list of organizations. Those were slowly formed over time. But the one I want you to notice is next screen, and because it's got a circle around economic and social. That is primarily where the NGOs all work, is within the Economic and Social Council. So you will see functional commissions. The commissions are what we attend. There's a lot of weird jargon at the UN, but commissions, there are different commissions that meet annually, and they're on those topics there on the left. What is interesting too, going down one more chart, drop down again. This is a challenge because I can't see what's coming up. That you will see under Secretariat, there's right about 5 acronyms down, there's DPI, and it's Department of Public Information. And that's what we'll be talking about here in a few minutes. That is where the civil society conferences come from. This conference is quite different from what we usually attend and engage in, because, well, there we go. it is in a completely different section of the UN, which makes it have some interesting components. Next screen. This is just a real simple outline of how the UN is structured, and it's very, very overwhelming. Those councils, International Court of Justice, it starts from the weakest and runs to the strongest. But believe it or not, there is no hierarchical system, as it says. It's more like a hand and fingers. The power is intentionally diffused through the United Nations system. But ultimately, the General Assembly controls most of the happening. They are the ultimate authority because it involves all of the vote of all the 193 member states. Whereas all of those other entities are sectioned off and smaller, like the Economic and Social Council, which we deal with all the time, is very small. Okay, next screen. So here we go, Civil Society Conference. What is it? Why does it matter? You can see the Salt Lake logo. You'll also see that this is the 68th United Nations Civil Society Conference. It's held every year. Well, we're at the 75th anniversary, so you get a sense of when it began. And here we are, 68th session. But go to the next screen. The DPI that I showed you, or you can see under the Secretariat down there, has now become the Department of Global Communications. So next. And when you think about the Department of Global Communications, and it used to be called the Department of Public Information, for those of you that are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints might be able to think of this in a more familiar term. It's like it's LDS Public Affairs and all of the media. Their job is to notify the world and to put in a positive light all of the programs of the United Nations system. That's their mandate, is to inform the world and to get everyone in the world literally involved with the programs and mandates. Currently, one of the strongest mandates is, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which you'll hear a lot about, and I understand you'll be learning about them in a little bit. Well, in one of your following sessions. Okay, next screen. So the question is, what is civil society? And it refers to a wide array of organizations, community groups, non-governmental organizations, which is an NGO, which is, in my opinion, an all-encompassing term. I mean, anything that's not government should be considered an NGO, but that's not exactly how it works. So you've got labor unions, indigenous, charitable organizations, churches, faith-based, professional associations, academia, foundations. One non-governmental group, though, is never considered part of civil society, and that's businesses. Private sector, private industry is never considered part of civil society, which I find quite odd. There is actually a major aversion to business as a whole, to private sector. They think the private sector doesn't have much to contribute to helping the world, and they think that the ideology is wrong, that they're too greed. Capitalism drives business, and there's just this suspicion. That is changing. You will see a lot more now where they term them public-private sector projects, and so that's changing, but generally speaking, not included. Do they have an impact at the UN? Yes, and we're gonna see some of that impact as we go along, because these are non-state actors with the intention of influencing state actors. In other words, non-state folks trying to influence governments. And so, next slide. How is that done? Well, first, I wanted to just address some of the things that I found over the years as a misconception about the UN. Most people assume that the UN was founded on the principle, almost a romantic principle, of we're going to sit everyone. It came at the end of World War II. We're done with war. We're going to sit everyone down to almost a Camelot Knights of the Round Table situation. We're going to discuss these things. We're going to sort it out, and everyone is going to come, and what is produced here will be completely neutral and helpful to the world. That is not the case. The UN is agenda driven. Every person that walks in the door of the UN has an agenda. I have an agenda. Every one of you have a reason why you'll be attending this conference. So for your own sake, lose the notion that everything that happens there is just for the good of the world and nobody's getting anything out of it. It's not the case. Second thing, do they operate along democratic principles? No. In fact, you rarely, you see votes taken in things like the Security Council, but in ECOSOC and social issue related things, most of the UN agencies, it's not democratic. We'll talk a lot about negotiated documents, you rarely will see a vote. And in fact, they don't want to take a vote because they're trying to get to what they refer to as consensus. And consensus is supposedly stronger than an actual vote, because if you have a vote, you're going to have some that are going to vote no. But consensus means you are working till people don't disagree anymore. And that's a really broad definition, because there's a lot of politics and power play happening behind the scenes when a document supposedly reaches consensus. Yes, maybe no one is verbally objecting, but they've been, in many cases, unfortunately, beat into submission. Each consensus document always has countries that will file reservations, which means these are things we object to. So that's a really interesting term. It is stronger. Don't ever expect that it's democratic, that everyone has you might have a voice. The question, you'll have a voice. They're big on, the United Nations system is big on giving people a voice, but that doesn't mean all voices are listened to in a democratic way. So is access to the UN system difficult? No, it actually is very accessible. In fact, in working with domestic politics, it's easier to see a UN ambassador from any country than it is to get in to see probably my own senator, unless I have connections or know who it is. Their doors are open. You can call, you can make appointments with their staff, and you can go visit with an ambassador from probably just about any country. That is good news, bad news. It allows everyone to influence, i.e. NGOs, civil society, to influence the system. And there's lots of different ways that can be done. But the main way that's done is next screen. It's all about the document. Each conference, each commission, what you will be going to, the civil society conference, will generate a document. Now, just FYI on the civil society conference, the document will not have really any clout, so to speak, and I'll tell you the different degrees of clout with documents, because this is done through the Secretariat. It's done through a different system, but primarily, you could never say that what comes out of the civil society conference was consensus. It was never negotiated by the countries of the world. It happens to be being negotiated as we speak by people like you and me. It's NGOs, it's civil society giving input into a document, and you will see it. Where will this document go after it's supposedly adopted at the civil society conference at the end of August, at the end of the conference? They plan to present it at different conferences throughout the rest of the year, primarily one on climate change. They will present this document as though it is, they want you to think it has binding and power, but the reality is it wasn't negotiated by the countries of the world, so it's absolutely a lesser document in terms of its power, but it does have normative powers. Whatever's in there will be repeated over and over again. We're going to talk about that. So next slide. This is how international agreements are done. Again, you have the Security Council, which operates on a little bit different level, and outside, the negotiations are never open to civil society on the Security Council. However, there are treaties, which is the most powerful. It has teeth, so to speak. If a country signs onto a treaty, and some of those are law of the sea type treaties, a lot of them do originate out of the Security Council. There are a few that originate in our realm, but primarily they are conventions and resolutions. The teeth are sanctions on a treaty. Conventions, you probably have heard of Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC. Those have unelected bodies that monitor, and if you sign on, you agree as a country to come before these different monitoring bodies every 3 to 4 years and explain to them why or why not you haven't been implementing what you signed on to. And we'll talk about some of the really interesting things that come as a result of countries signing on to these conventions. The United States, the US, does not sign on to very many treaties or conventions. In fact, you can list the conventions on one hand that the US is a party to, whereas the rest of the world has signed on. Because conventions, if a treaty, which a convention in the case of our Constitution would fall under, it becomes the law of the land. And no matter what the administration is in the United States, no matter who's in the White House, those treaties, those conventions still do not get signed because no one wants to turn sovereignty over to the UN. So conventions are powerful. Resolutions, literally a dime a dozen. There are constant resolutions being produced, but they have power in the sense that they control the monies and the focus of the UN, the mandate of the UN. So they're not to be ignored. So next slide. Generally speaking, their compliance is all voluntary except on a treaty. So you would say, if they're non-binding, so what's the big deal? Why would it matter? Why would they be impacting me? And go to the next one. Because of what we refer to as soft law. In the United States, in our judicial system, precedent controls what happens. When you listen to or read a decision or ruling of the US Supreme Court, they will cite precedent. That's how law is navigated in the United States and in most countries. So what is happening in the United Nations with those documents, they are creating a form of soft law. If you repeat on the same topic and use the same language over and over again, it becomes customary law, soft law, which then translates and goes down into the countries. For example, 53%, let's see, US courts have cited UN documents hundreds of times in court decisions, and 53% of those documents have been just the lowest level, which are resolutions. So they do have power. The trickle-down effect is there, and it does impact you. And there was supposed to be a video, little clip that I had. It's up more towards the top. Can you go back up? There it is, that black screen. Before you click on it, let me give you a lead into this. We have used this. This is from The Devil Wears Prada, because Anne Hathaway's character, Andy, is totally confused about the fashion world and has no idea the impact. So, Anne, let's see if we can get that to play.
I don't think it loaded. That's too bad. Maybe upgrade the subject.
Oh, all right. Well, I encourage you to go back.
Wait, let's try. Media Not Fantasy.
You'll recognize this scene. It's one of the most famous scenes from.
Yeah. Darn it, I love that video.
This is the one that Ryan Coach shares all the time. And you can look it up on YouTube and share it.
Yeah,
as well.
I'll do that. Can you do that, Kim? Because my screen is busy right now. But
Yeah.
It is the blue sweater scene, if you can find it.
it's awesome.
And,
Okay.
and while you guys are looking for that, I think it's really important. So the soft law, what we're essentially talking about is language. And I'd say that the trickle down effect, wouldn't you say, Marcia, through the years, it's increasingly in speed. It's like direct, the language that we're seeing because of the technology that people can share. And so people are glomming onto language very quickly.
So NGOs, civil society, those that are in the know, they know the system, they know what they're doing, and even if it's not a negotiated document, now what they're doing is they're holding their own conferences, creating their own outcome documents with their favored language, and then they just put them out and keep saying this is international consensus language over and over again. So if you get a court system that's favorable to whatever's in that outcome document, they just cite that document. It's reached critical mass, so to speak. Carolina, you're right, and they're just used all the time, even though, and they will refer to controversial things. Different groups, NGOs, civil society will refer to controversial things as though it's consensus, that the 193 member states agree to that, when nothing of the sorts has ever happened. And that happens consistently. Right now, and we'll talk about it in a minute, on the SOGI issue, you're going, what's that? Here's the acronym: Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity. The Equality Act in the United States, that is the basis of the what I would refer to as incredibly dangerous piece of legislation in regard to sexual orientation, gender identity. And they just put that in everywhere. That has never reached consensus within the UN system anywhere, but it doesn't stop NGOs and UN agencies from using that terminology. So we're not going to get that. Let's go back to
that movie, Marcia, if you want to watch it.
Yeah, we'll put it up. It's really.
You got to stop sharing so I can share.
Now, why does yours work and mine does not?
I'm a millennial.
No.
No. And I've seen all this before. Deskins is trying to reinvent the driveway, so actually it's all the other dresses. We have some right here, and then I have one. And I think it can be very interesting. No, it's just baffling to me. Why is it so impossible to put together a decent run-through? You people have had hours and hours to prepare. It's just so confusing to me. Where are the advertisers? We have some pieces from Banana Republic. Well, we need more, don't we? Oh, what do you think?
Yeah, well, you know me. I'm on board.
You think it's too much like
the clock in July? I thought no, not for accessories. It should work.
Where are the belts for this strap? Why is no one ready? Here. Stuffed ball. It's so different.
Did we lose the sound?
Yeah.
You go to your closet.
Are we back on?
And you select, I don't know, that lumpy blue sweater, for instance, because you're trying to tell the world that you take yourself too seriously to care about what you put on your back. But what you don't know is that that sweater is not just blue. It's not turquoise. It's not lapis. It's actually cerulean. And you're also blithely unaware of the fact that in 2002, Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns. And then I think it was Yves Saint Laurent, wasn't it, who showed cerulean military jackets? I think we need a jacket here. And then cerulean quickly showed up in the collections of 8 different designers. And it filtered down through the department stores and then on down into some tragic casual corner where you no doubt fished it out of some clearance bin. However, that blue represents millions of dollars, countless jobs. And it's sort of comical how you think that you made a choice that exempt you from the fashion industry when in fact wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
You might have to say the main point of that.
The main point of that is Andy's confusion at the whole system and lack of understanding of how it works, and yet the fashion industry, as she points out, is controlled from by those very people in that very room. And the UN parallel is, yeah, you don't know what you're being impacted impacted by that actually originated in those buildings in New York and in The Hague and in the Human Rights Council in Geneva that are playing into your life and you have no idea. And we're all blithely unaware and a little bit illiterate on the system. So what's happening is back to the documents and what occurs at the UN, they're actually exporting ideology. That's why I say it's not a neutral, it's not a benign entity. And you may agree completely with UN agenda, and that's good for those who do, but make no mistake, there is exporting of ideology going on. And what you have is what we refer to as the bully factor. And those that have been with us at the UN on those late nights when the negotiations at a commission run in, so the commission ends on a Friday, and so they have to be able to gavel down the document, meaning accept it on Friday at 3 o'clock. So all night Thursday night, they are in the room negotiating. And they've been doing that probably for several nights to get this document done. So there is untold pressure put on these delegations to accept the wording that's in these documents. And there's often resistance, but if you're a UN delegate who is negotiating for this, you are in New York, you like your job, you want to keep your job. Your job is to produce a document. And if you are an obstructionist, if a country is an obstructionist, the funding for their aid is tied up in it. Whether or not those delegates and diplomats will keep their job is tied up in it. It's all the pieces are there for intense pressure to say, yeah, I agree. And we've already talked about how that rolls out. The compliance committees are really interesting in that let me tell you about them. If you sign on to one of the conventions, I mentioned about the compliance committees. These are just appointed people. None of it's elected, but you get things like on CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. You get things like the committee recommends that China has to legalize prostitution. Kyrgyzstan has to legalize lesbianism. Belarus was ordered or highly, there's suggestions, but there's pressure that they needed to eliminate Mother's Day because mother is a negative stereotype, so get rid of it. Ordered Libya to reinterpret the Quran. Governments are free to ignore it, but pressure is brought upon them to comply. They told the Vatican to change their canon law. Those are the types of things that happen. The Vatican, the Holy See, is the representative, and they are considered a member state. Diplomats, let's talk real quickly about UN jargon. You will hear the term a UN mission. Those who are members of the church recognize that in a different way. You might be familiar with embassies around the world. Missions are what a country's operation is that's connected to the United Nations system. That's the terminology. So if you were in New York or in Geneva or in The Hague and you wanted to go visit the mission of Kyrgyzstan, you're going to their offices. And all of those employees, those diplomats work for that mission. And sometimes missions and embassies are combined, but they're separate entities. So let's go to the next screen. So how did this interesting system evolve? Well, back when the Equal Rights Amendment failed in like 1981, 1982, depends on who you talk to, those activists, what I'll refer to as radical feminists, and I recognize that there are feminist groups today that are working to change the tenets of feminism or bring it back to its original roots. Unfortunately, within the UN system, I don't hesitate to use the word radical because radical feminism's control. They moved into the UN system back in 1981, 1982, started working as civil society, eventually befriended the different UN agencies, UNICEF, UNFPA, UNESCO, some of the acronyms you might be familiar with. Those are powerful UN agencies. They are now employees of these agencies and leaders of these agencies. And they interface with like-minded NGOs And it's a recipe for some really interesting things. And you can see on the right there, Toward a More Feminist United Nations. That's just an NGO, very powerful NGO. The woman at the bottom, Kate Gilmore, is a super powerful British diplomat who worked her way up through the system. She's currently the Deputy High Commissioner of the Human Rights System. She is infamous for saying such things as, the home is a place of torment and torture. The kitchen is a torture chamber, and the bedroom's no better than a brothel. Those are some of her, I'm paraphrasing there, that's her attitude. Feminists have been able, go to the next screen. This list of gender words in the UN system and parlance, gender means women. That's just half of the lists or references to gender that were in one document that we recently tracked. It's astounding. And all that, this is addressing women's rights. So gender access, it's women's access to education. Gender analysis, look at things with the lens of women's rights. Gender awareness, you get the idea. What's happened over the years is men and boys have become almost non-existent. Go down to the next one. In UN documents, for example, we tabulated the top 30 documents, UN documents, the most powerful ones. You will see man or men listed just 267 times, and that is always in reference to men should be doing something to help women, whereas you can see the number of times women are referenced. Boy, same thing. Girls, there you go. Huge discrepancy in attention and focus. Men and boys are virtually non-existent in the ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council system. And go down to the next screen. Just in this last couple of weeks, a really interesting, well, yeah, you skip that one. The woman on top is the head of one of the most powerful UN agencies, and I honestly won't even attempt to pronounce her name because she's from, I think it's Kenya. UN Women, about 10 years ago, was formed. It consolidated all of the different women's aid, women's rights into one entity. And let me just give you an example. UN Women has a $500 million budget every year. The UN as a whole has almost $6 billion at their disposal. So you can imagine how much power they wield around the world with that kind of a budget. And UN Women is one of the more powerful ones, right up there with UNICEF, UNESCO, all the ones you would be familiar with. They held what we call a side event, which was, they sponsored it. And during that side event, a really interesting thing was announced. So they're the UN agency tasked with pushing forward rights for women, and they announced that their agency was moving towards eliminating the term women completely and replacing it with gender. The name of the event was Gender Diversity Beyond Binaries. A trans female there at the bottom, Imar Jones, was the moderator. But the director stated, quote, "We cannot talk about leaving no one behind without LGBTQI+ and the full range of gender diversities that exist." She stated, "Sexual orientation and gender identity are core values of the Sustainable Development Goals, and signaled that billions in aid meant for women may be redirected if UN agencies take it upon themselves to redefine the internationally agreed goal of gender equality and move it away from women's rights." She said her agency would push until equality of all genders became the norm. She said the UN must work to overturn laws in the 70 nations that still do not validate homosexual behavior. And
Marcia, can we have the reference for that quote?
Yeah, in the bottom of my notes on this screen, it has a write-up from one of our colleagues, CPAM, who was in the room, and they give all the details on this.
When did that happen?
When it happened, 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago. So whether
eradication of women is literally happening right now, like in real time.
that they're moving toward.
I meant the erasure of our language, of the women language even, which holds so much.
Yes, the focus from the UN Women's Organization is moving towards gender and gender in all its diversity. Equality of all genders is their goal now. So what that means in terms of that $500 million a year and the focus in the UN, we're not sure, but that sent shockwaves through the international system for the UN for UN Women to signal that. So go down. I'm feeling bad. Next screen. So that is a really that is just one. We could spend all day talking about the difference in ideologies, and you may agree with it, and there may be some on the phone call who agree with that ideology. That's everyone's choice. Everyone's there again with their own agenda and pushing what they believe to be the right thing for people. So why do people do what they do? Caroline and I talked about this briefly. We're just going to run through this for a minute. Next screen. Again, I could regale you with stories of things that have occurred at the UN that you probably will shake your head at. Here on the far right, there is some swag that was handed out at a side event, and those are condom packets. And this was an event for young people. This was a Girl Scouts Girl Guide sponsored event. You can look at the different formulations of the condoms that were handed out. So transgender issue is just accelerated beyond control within the UN system. HIV positive, the one on the left, ask yourself, well, I always make the statement, HIV could have been stopped back in I think it was 81, 82 when they first identified AIDS. Why wasn't it? The implementation of quarantines and all the protocols to stop an infectious disease from spreading, it didn't happen. Why? Why didn't that happen? I'm a nasty woman. The Women's Rights March and some of the things that are prominent in our country. What would prompt women to wear pink, vulgar pussy hats? What is it? Healthy, Happy, and Hot. That's a booklet that's handed out. It's directed at young people, young adults, and within it says you don't have to tell anyone if you're HIV infected. You can be involved with someone and you don't have any obligation to tell them. Why would people do that? And that's what we get asked. I get asked all the time. What drives this? Why would this be happening? Turning next slide to the work of Stearns Business College professor Jonathan Haidt, who has studied this for 30 plus years. You can find his information online. He's done a lot of TED Talks. He says, look for the highest value that a group or individual hold, and then you will understand their thoughts and actions. The highest value is what binds a group together, what they would rally around, organize, and protest for. He's written a book, next slide, called The Righteous Mind, and it is a compilation of his work. And he explains that all individuals, all human beings, react or respond to 6 core values or principles. And he's distilled them down to those 6 things on the left, or on the right of your screen there. So they are, you can see them. The interesting thing is people on the left side of the political spectrum only respond to 2 of those 6. They only respond value-wise. They value these principles: care and compassion, fairness and equality, fairness/equality. Now, the right side of the political spectrum value and recognize and respond to all 6. Now, Jonathan Haidt comes from the left side of political spectrum, so he does not hesitate to frame it this way. He says now that liberty is kind of a swing one, that both sides recognize liberty, but different formulations. Think of it, these 6 things as like taste buds in your mouth. You just don't taste. If you're from the left side of the political spectrum, generally speaking, you don't taste loyalty, the sacred, religion, authority. Those just aren't things that you can relate to or you don't value. And so over the years, those are a little obscure, but it just, in my mind, it comes down to these three things. So next screen, the left recognizes, oh, you skipped one, I think. These are the three conservative values. Okay, now you see the left three highest values. Those three things, if you look at most things that are happening within the United Nations system, if you look at cultural politics and domestic politics, culture, you will see all three of those values being manifest. They all intersect, they all cross over one another, but generally, you can give me any issue and I can tell you where it would be slotted into that thing. And next screen, you saw what I think, and those on the right talk about this all the time. Faith, family, freedom. That's what we value. The left, one more screen, keep going. They value these three things. So let's talk about real quick, sexual liberty. What does that look like? Sexual liberty, if I were to give you a definition where it says number one there, and next screen. And those on the political left, I don't think I've overstated this. Any person, regardless of age, should be free to engage in sexual behaviors with anyone at any time, at any place, and society should work to alleviate any consequences that may result. That's why HIV protocol or disease protocols were never implemented. It would have flown in the face of sexual liberty. We just need to control the consequences and alleviate them. We don't stop people from engaging in whatever they want to do regarding sex. It's the sexual revolution is one way, another common way to talk about it. So next slide. How does that play out? Rampant STDs. Everything is sex positive. Your education is sex positive. Gay pride parades. That's why you would take your children to a gay pride parade, and you can see the kinds of things that you might see there. But it doesn't matter. It's sex positive. Prostitution, you don't call prostitutes prostitutes. You call them sex workers. It's a chosen field, and it should be whatever negative consequences should be. You should set up laws to prevent those. 50 Shades of Grey, thruples, divorce, cohabitation. 75% of certain segments of the society have all of their children are born outside of wedlock, usually within a cohabiting relationship. HIV/AIDS, all of those things are just examples of what I'm talking about, how it plays out. And it gives you a perspective as to why that is happening and why it's okay. But here's the unfortunate reality. Next screen. As the founder of the Howard Center said, you can have sexual liberty or you can have strong families, but you can't have both. Sexual liberty, by definition, is anti-family. And that's why my organization is heavily involved in these issues. They produce negative consequences for children and for families. Okay, next screen. So next one is equality, sameness. What does that look like? And next screen. Everything is about equality. That care, compassion, equality. The women's right, second wave feminism fixated on that issue and has taken it in some really interesting things. The whole the same-sex marriage issue, human rights become very important when you start talking about equality, because if you can get something to be labeled as a human right, then the international legal system and domestic legal system has to pay attention to it. So equality, don't deny us. Race, class, gender. Abortion is reproductive rights. Heavy duty promotion of that within the UN system. The push on social justice has an equality, social equality and care, compassion component, wealth redistribution. The church, why do I have a chapel there? Just in the last year or two, the observation has started to happen. Why would I put a church up there? When you think of religion, and there's quite a bit of disdain now towards religion and religious freedom, nobody wants to claim it, the rise of the nuns, those who don't have a religious affiliation, because religion is perceived as being treating people unequally, up to and including going to heaven, salvation, whatever you want, it leaves people out. Leaving people out, excluding people, it creates the ultimate inequality. You won't go to heaven. That is unacceptable. And there's a lot of research being done that looks at how and why people view religion in a negative light. And at its core, it has to do with equality. You create inequality. Everyone should be able to do what they want to do and still be equal with everyone else. So you can't say something. Commandments would be wrong because if you break them, you're sinning, and that makes you unequal. Can't have that. Race, class, gender. You've heard that nonstop as well. So next screen, the last one is environmentalism. Most people are a little puzzled by that. How does that play into all of this? It undergirds and supports all of the things. Population control issues. That's what, yeah, go ahead, Anne, you were right, go there. So what does environmentalism mean? Well, most of the programs at the UN, many of them are dedicated to what they call family planning, which is directed at population control, reducing the population of the world because we're overpopulated is the statement. Animal rights, that top thing, it talks about what is done, the little pig, it talks about what is being done to the animals and they should be treated as humans. The woman with her dogs, have you noticed that people, this is all part of it, the pet culture. You don't have children, you have pets. You have dogs in particular, and they become as your children. Go to the grocery store, 40 years ago when I got married, the pet aisle was just a tiny, tiny section in the grocery store. You wanted pet food, dog food, you had to go to the front and ask somebody. I mean, it was just tucked away because it wasn't done. Now it's reversed. Now we have big box stores that deal with pets, and the grocery aisle with the pet stuff is as large, if not larger, than the children's aisle. Took out diapers, children's, young people's aisle is really small. Wicca, which is earth worship, is the fastest growing religion, particularly on college campuses. Its essence is, again, earth worship. And you can look at it, paganism, we're familiar with that. This is new paganism. This is neo-paganism. Fixation on family planning, contraception. That's why the fights over whether or not insurance should be able to fund contraception or be required to, because that's the holy grail. You've got to stop population. Climate change, global warming, of course, is the vehicle now, contemporary vehicle that drives all that. And sadly, next screen, none of these three things could have gotten, particularly sexual revolution, could have gotten going without the mainstreaming of radical feminism. It undergirds all of the things that we're talking about. So next screen, we're almost done here. Because morality, everyone that comes to the UN has their own value system and their own morality, and they are there doing what they think is best for people. And I often hear conservatives say, well, things like, well, that's just immoral. They shouldn't be doing that. Or no, they think that conservatives are immoral. It's immoral to have 4, 5, 6 children. It's immoral to have more than one. It's immoral to even have children. They think it's immoral to fight same-sex marriage. They think we are immoral. So don't use that, because it just becomes, don't even go there. My morality versus yours. But the question needs to be, what does your morality, what are your values, what do they produce? If they're implemented into policy, what does that policy produce? That's where the discussion needs to be held. Next screen. And so how do we engage? Try to win the person, not just the argument. You can see you can't be persuasive if you're abrasive, and your tone absolutely matters. And most importantly, your opposition is not the enemy. Their ideologies and policies are. View the UN system as the mission field, and you are going there to spread the good news in many ways, and to be a positive force promoting what you think helps people to flourish. You convert them to your ideas and how you understand that. Lastly, Dennis Prager has said this for long before he became famous: seek for clarity rather than agreement. I love to win. And I tell people that it's really hard for me in a policy discussion to not just, pull out fact after fact and just hammer people. That I want them to agree with me. This has freed me from that because I don't have to get them to agree with me. I simply allow space for them to explain why they are promoting what they promote and give them time to talk about it. And then the courtesy is they would allow me. So we're just clarifying where our positions are. We don't even have to agree. And it's remarkable how that changes the tone of things. And I think we're done. And I apologize for the confusion on this. It threw me off my game to not be able to put this up. So, questions?
Thank you so much, Marcia. That was great. And we didn't have time to introduce Marcia, but Kathy, could you do that really quick? Just because she has significant experience and credential.
Yes.
She's talking about.
So again, yes, thank you, Marcia. We're privileged to have you speak to us and share so much valuable information with us. Marcia is the Vice President of International Programs for United Families International, or UFI. She has 20 years of experience monitoring and education, monitoring and education at UN conferences and commissions in various parts of the world. Marcia is a lead policy analyst and writer for United Families International and the author of the United Families International series Guide to Family Issues, and directs the development and updating of UN Negotiating Guide, which is very impressive. She holds a master's degree from Harvard University, where she specialized in public administration and public policy issues. She's married to Greg Barlow, and they have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. So again, thank you so much.
If there aren't any questions, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to explain a little bit of why Big Ocean is involved with the UN. So we have quite a variety of folks on this call, and then we're going to be sharing it with those that have asked for these trainings. So you'll be able to go back and review if needed. But Big Ocean Women, we are a maternal feminist organization, an international one. And we, our work is focused on representing and bringing perspectives of faith, family, and motherhood at all levels of civil society. And so by nature, we care about what happens at the local. And if we care about what happens at the local, we have to go to kind of the places where a lot of these decisions and where these ideologies are first kind of created and then promoted. And so that we can be watchful once they trickle down into soft law, and we can say, hey, that language, I'm not, interested in using that language, or I prefer to, discuss things in this light or whatever. And when we can educate a lot of women and a lot of families on these things that are happening, I think that is a good thing. So that's the space that Big Ocean Women is trying to fill. And with this conference coming right into our backyards, we felt like it was a great time for us all to get informed and get trained so that we can really make a difference. And so that's what we're doing. So does anybody have any questions out there for Big Ocean or for Marcia?
I have a quick question. Real quick before we just open that Carol. Marcia just gave us so much information training. It's gonna be hard to just gave. Marcia, you were able to. Can you guys hear me? Sometimes my volume is kind of weird.
Oh, very good.
If you're not speaking,
I'll just talk really loud.
Yourself. If you're not speaking.
Well, so before we start asking lots of questions, I think the best way to do questions would probably be more of an email format, so we have records. There's so much information you just gave us, Marcia, that you're gonna have to be at the UN for 5 years. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I not see that? So if this is your first experience with UN in general, I would imagine your eyes are they look like a deer in the headlight. So what if we move question formatting to like more of an email, so we can have a record, unless they're just or limit it to about 5 minutes of questions.
I think the email is a good idea, and there might be things that come up like later on in the day or tomorrow, the next day. We will send out the recording of this meeting today to you as well, so that you can go back and review it and perhaps at that point you'll have more questions because it was a lot. And Marcia, we are just so grateful to you for sharing all that. Unmute yourself. Marcia, you're on mute. Unmute yourself. Unmute. Can I unmute her? Oh, there we go. Hey, Marcia.
I was just saying, I tend to not use a garden hose, but a fire hose when I present.
That's not anything that they're not going to see at the UN, so it's perfect.
And I think one thing that all of us should be aware of is that there are many wonderful pro-family, pro-life groups who are working like we are. And with our hands joined together, we're a powerful force. So thank you so much. I mean, we are really grateful for this camaraderie and this association that we have with wonderful organizations like United Families International. So thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Tracy just asked a really good question about the USCSC and all the documents. Can we have that answered in an email format, Marcia? Would you be available to be able to just answer?
Sure, and I'm not understanding what the question is. I didn't see the acronym, so.
Oh yeah, so we'll make sure to send them all to you. And
okay.
I would love to be able to just sit down and pick your brain, but 44 of us is a large group, but not large enough to do what we need to do at this conference. So
I will try to be available for questions and would love to chat with you. Like I say, this is what I wish somebody had told me years and years ago.
It's wonderful.
Absolutely. So helpful. The one that you said last, seek for clarity rather than agreement. I wish I could have understood that my first year. I went in like a bull in the china shop, and I think that's what we want to do. We see our families being threatened, we see our kids being threatened, and we want to go in and we want to take out those opponents, those ideologies. And we tie those ideology to the people that we're meeting. And that is the most detrimental thing that we can do when we go to conferences.
Yeah, they are there doing what they think is best, and we can't lose sight of that. They are good people. They're just misinformed and misled, in my opinion. So.
And I absolutely love that you touched on that, because with that compassion, that love, that understanding, the desire to seek understanding rather than agreement will definitely give us a lot of power as we go forward in this training and in this conference. So.
Can I just touch on one little tiny question that they were asking for the audio, for the vocal tone to help? So we have many, many experiences at the UN where we have been able to connect with people with very different ideologies and form relationships that are ongoing. I think that the best thing you can do is to, if you are choosing to be a Big Ocean Women representative, we ask that you read over all of our tenets, and if you are familiar with those, those are the places, that's where you start the conversations and where you can express yourself. And if you, one of our biggest tenets is that all people are deserving of respect, and if you confront, when you're speaking with people, if that is your place, you're coming from a place of abundance where you are wanting to learn more about where they're coming from, the discussion can be a positive one, and then that's how you influence and that's how you can impact. Even if it's just having somebody view something slightly different than they did before, that's a huge win. And if you are able to understand their story, that's a huge win. So we have found that there are good things that are happening at the UN. There are tremendous organizational leaders that are doing the very best that they can, and being a solution to some of these global issues in the best way that they know how. And I think that we've been very successful at linking arms with organizations that we can work with. And then there are organizations that are doing it differently than we are, and can kind of be challenging to some of our ideologies. Nevertheless, they're there, and I think that engaging in conversation with organizations, with you're going to be attending these presentations, just to always make comments and always represent your views from a place of abundance rather than scarcity or fear or anger. because that has residual effects that are really, really difficult, to overcome instead of being able to really impact, through positive means. And that's the kind of culture that we promote at Big Ocean. But we have it looks like we have a lot of different questions.
Nicole asked one with tone specific. We will be doing a training later on in this session that talks about tone and how to address different issues, like a full training on that. And so, Nicole, that will be covered more in depth in a little bit. And we agree that tone has a lot to do with it. I'm trying to find Nicole so I can look at you on this video. And
yeah,
I'm just gonna look at the camera and I'm talking to you.
Okay.
Carol, should we wrap up? Busy mom.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, we will be discussing next week in particular about language and about the sustainable development goals and things. And so, yeah, we are just so grateful for Marcia for taking some time. She has significant experience at the UN and knows the UN system very well. And it's a lot to learn. And so she's put forth so many years of preparation in this. And so we're just grateful for her time. And then please join us next week. Also, as a bit of housekeeping too, you have a link to watch this again, but please don't be forwarding it to anyone outside of our group.
Yeah, just don't forward it.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
If you have someone you need it to go to, if you would funnel those requests through us, we'd appreciate it.
And with that being said, we have, as I said, 44 people on this training today. That's amazing. It's a lot of people that are going to be able to go train to this conference. If we can get more, that's our invite. If we can all invite 3 other people to join us, this is information that needs to get out. And it's not super heavy. I think you hear the term UN and it's kind of intimidating at the beginning. If people can come to these trainings, they're going to be able to go to this conference in a powerful, confident way.
Or just navigate life in a better way too.
Just navigate the craziness of what life can be sometimes. So we're going to invite all of you guys to think of 3 different people and invite them. Don't forward this training, but bring people to the trainings.
Awesome.
And if they're interested, we've got to have, is it August 1st is the deadline for signing up. So this is one of those time sensitive, start thinking today, start inviting today. Let's get as many people as we can to keep this ball rolling and going.
Do we know, Carol, if they're going to increase the cap on attendance?
I'm not sure, but it doesn't hurt to just try and register. I think we're almost at capacity. And also, please, any requests for people to join these trainings goes through Kathy Malauulu. And you should have all received her email when she sent you the link. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Kathy, do you have anything else to add?
Nope, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for taking some time out of your Saturday, and we'll meet you back here next week.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Carolina. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Everyone.